it is very important now that housing is one of the factors affecting migration and displacement, both for IDPs and refugees, because when we have a look at Europe, at other countries, hosting countries, housing is one of the factors which allows the migrants to identify the country as their destination country. So the availability of housing for, in particular, Ukrainian refugees is one of the factors which keeps them in a specific country. And if we look at Ukraine and IDPs in Ukraine, housing is one of the factors affecting the feeling of well-being of IDPs, and it stimulates their desire to come back. And it is the second important factor stimulating IDPs to return to their original place of residence. I would like also to very quickly outline the methodology of my research and the sources of my data. Also, I have added my presentation to my presentation a few fundamentals of housing, because I believe this is quite a complex and comprehensive topic. So why do we need to understand housing? How can we understand it? Because I didn't want simply to give you a description of something. I would like also to equip you with a certain toolkit, which can be applied independently to investigate this issue in Ukraine. So let's have a look at the housing system in Ukraine. Looks like, and how accommodation of IDPs looks like now, but this is a specific topic, yet we may generalize and transcend this topic to talk about other very important issues which affect rebuilding of Ukraine. And we're going to look at the issues I have mentioned through the perspective of housing policies. So, methodology and data sources that allow me to analyze this topic. So I work as NGO New Housing Policy, and I am dealing with housing as a postdoctoral student in Europe. So in comparison with the European situation, there are very little data, and there is very little information. Quantitative data and qualitative data, and the data we are using I get from open sources, and they usually are collected by European organizations. I have been working with international organizations, and I'm also one of the researchers who collect data. Unfortunately, I cannot present them today, but for me it is very interesting to see how policies adopted from above affect people in communities. So let us continue with our topic. So housing fundamentals, how to understand housing. First of all, you need to know that housing question is not new, and it is not something that has just emerged or 3 years ago or 10 years ago. It is a systemic question, which has been researched and tackled for centuries. So when we talk about housing, I think we refer to the beginning of its rise in importance since 19th century, when a lot of people started to come to the cities due to urbanization, and this exerted a lot of pressure on housing. And here you can see on the slide a picture of mid-Kaserne, and these are tenements housing a lot of people, and this is the situation for many people, many households before the First World War. And so my intention is to discuss some historical context, in particular the First World War, to see how the issue of housing has become a political issue. Because imagine, people went to the front to fight, and the families which stayed behind were pressurized by their landlords for rent, and so there was a huge urge to provide for stable housing for such families and to protect them socially. And the same situation we can see after the Second World War, because the aftermath of the Second World War involved millions of refugees in Europe, and there was no time to wait till this issue resolves itself. And so the interventions were proposed by the state, and this started the so-called welfare state era. And so let us talk about this a bit. After the First World War, we see the emergence of social housing on the large scale. It started in Vienna when between 1923 and 1934, Vienna built over 60,000 municipal apartments, which then amounted to 10% of the total population of Vienna. And this was funded by a progressive housing tax on luxury goods. And it is very interesting to see that this progressive housing tax was funding housing, and on the other hand, the regulation of the currency market made the land prices lower, and so the housing stock was only growing. And I think in Vienna now, I cannot remember the figure, but it's the figure that comes to my mind is from 40 to 60% of housing is considered to be social housing. And so this is the tradition that is there to stay, because the housing that was built as social housing was not temporary, and it actually was publicly owned by the cities. So I think this is an interesting experience for Ukraine. And it is interesting that this is what happened during the First World War, which saw also the regulation of the tenancy, because before the First World War, tenancy was regulated only by the agreement between the landlord and tenant. And during the First World War and the Second World War, we see the first generation of rent control, nominal freeze in Europe and the US. And what is very interesting, the tenancy control was supported by all political parties, and it was considered to be a very logical step, because the politicians said that it is not possible to build as much housing as was needed to provide for everyone. And so the only possible instrument to provide housing to those who needed it was politically induced nominal freeze. And so when this crisis was not yet resolved, this was the instrument to provide social housing, which I mentioned during the previous slide. So I think it is rather interesting as an overview because it connects wars and crises to housing, and wars and crises stimulate a reframing of political instruments and other instruments in terms of housing. And some more remarks here, though housing is extremely context specific, so you cannot simply borrow tools or policies from Austria and start copy-pasting them to Ukraine. But at the same time, there are quite a lot of key similarities in housing which are global. So everyone needs a home. Construction of housing doesn't mean that it is something that is optional. So you can do without an iPhone, but you cannot do without a house. And at the same time, when everyone needs a home, housing is at the same time a home and an asset. And so this is the conflict between housing as a home and housing as an asset leads to quite a lot of challenges, because housing construction in any context is time-consuming and resource-intensive, and this is a limited product. By limited, I mean that it requires certain investment, which would be various, but the available land is limited. And our opportunity to build more, to create more products is also limited. So these are some basic premises for the topic. And so home housing is not just a consumer goods, a piece of consumer goods, a consumer product, but it's also about identity, history. And when we talk about housing in the context of displacement, housing and stability are central to maintain one's good health, to maintain one's integration into society, and that stimulates the need for post-war reconstruction. And during the previous wars, the policies focused on providing housing as home, and housing as investment as a concept has emerged from the 1980s, when we witness the deregulation of the and financialization of housing markets, and then the housing issue was more or less in part resolved due to social housing and to providing affordability and availability of housing until the crisis was resolved. And so the third thing I would like to mention, also I wanted you to show this and to that it is not an easy question. There is no magic pill, there is no magic software or policy which would allow everyone to have a house tomorrow. So, because there are quite a lot of intersecting spheres, overlapping contexts, and actually you can add quite a lot to this list. So, transportation, construction, social policy, fiscal policy, energy policy. In Ukraine also, it is social equity, restoration or reconstruction of housing as a reconstruction of social equity, and in general deciding what is possible as such. And this is what is important from the point of view of restriction and promotion, because we can here create some regulatory instruments on the one hand, and on the other hand, we can use subsidies as tools, and subsidies can go both to objects and to subjects. So either to provide subsidies to build something or to give money to a specific person. So, but what is important here? This is not one instrument. Housing policy always involves whole toolkits, and it is important how they interact. And why are we talking about it? Because we need to understand what kind of policies are in effect now and what can be an efficient solution to the housing crisis Ukraine is facing today. So this was a kind of introduction, some basics of housing. I would like also to say a few things about the crisis of housing in Ukraine, and let us start by talking what kind of housing system Ukraine has, what are its peculiarities, and how we can compare it with Europe. So why cannot we simply copy-paste some policies or social housing concepts from Europe and for Ukraine? So to talk about the Ukrainian system of housing, we need to understand super home ownership housing regime, as is the term used by the researchers, meaning that most of the households in Ukraine before the full-scale invasion had housing which was not mortgaged. Because if you have a look at Northern Europe also has housing, also has a lot of house owners, but quite a lot of house owners in Northern Europe have mortgaged their housing. And so what is specific in Ukraine, again, there is very little of such practice, and this is a result of specific historical situation, namely the privatization of the 1990s. And this privatization, which was giveaway incentive, has its own consequences. On the one hand, it helped to overcome the shocks and aftermaths of the perestroika. On the other hand, most households had their own houses, and so they had one problem off their list, but the situation, this was a temporary solution, because quite a lot of challenges were associated with such housing, because around 71% of Ukrainian households never repaired their houses. So, and there was quite little attention towards improving the quality of such housing, meaning that everyone has their own house and no one thought what to do with this, how to develop the housing stock, how to maintain it, and how to implement programs to improve efficient use of such housing. So, and it was also not decided who is responsible for specific aspects, like who is responsible for the land, who is responsible for the territory of the yard. So there was no delegation of such responsibility. And here you can see some more statistics on this slide, showing that as of 2022, almost half of the Ukrainians lived in overcrowded conditions, and 40% of households didn't carry any major repairs to their housing, and 71% of households reside in housing built in the 1960s, 1980s. Right. And because everything was privatized, we cannot say whether it is only positive or only negative. We shouldn't be totally critical about that, but I was thinking that this super home ownership housing regime might have some positive, excuse me, please, we need to wait. There is something with the sound. Right? So, excuse me, please. I have a car passing by, and so, right. And so, such super home ownership housing regime provided the stability of the neighborhoods. For instance, in abroad, we have a huge issue of gentrification when we have a much more stable structure, which could give more opportunities for participation of the communities in the life of their neighborhoods. So, but what is negative about that, about such kind of privatization? We all are familiar because no other option for getting housing was created, and the reduced rate mortgages for buying first housing for young families were introduced in Ukraine, but they were of not very efficient because only 41,000 households used this opportunity since 1994, which is rather low. And also there were quite a lot of, Soviet time planning things like apartment Q. It was not moving, and it was continued as a practice. And what is also very important for Ukraine is that actually even the poorest strata of the population got their own private housing, while the state subsidizes the utilities. And if we have a look at other countries also and compare Ukraine to them, we can say that it is quite interesting that Ukraine didn't have any social housing stock pre-2022, and there was some temporary housing built mostly in the east and the south of Ukraine, but the amount of such social housing units was so low that it had practically no impact on accessibility of housing. Also, the rental market in Ukraine, in comparison to other countries, both now and before the full-scale war, has been dominated not by companies but by private individuals, people. And I'm saying this to discuss the context of financialization of housing in Ukraine, because yes, there are some potential investors, but in general, our tenements and rent market is regulated by individual relations. So it is not regulated, in other words. And this is a shadow market. And so what is interesting here also, this sounds a very liberal, very deregulatory kind of policy, but this deregulation of housing market has its own roots in the Soviet Union, because it was in the Soviet Union, it was forbidden to lend anything. So there was no official tenancy market, and as such, the civil code or the urban planning code had nothing about rent, and so theoretically this concept was forbidden as such. And when Ukraine, like many post-Soviet countries, inherited this legislation, there was no legislation for tenancy. So this is an interesting fact to consider for me too. And so what it means and how it is developing, let us talk now about that. So it is quite logical that when there is no social housing, then after displacement, people cannot get social housing. There is no social housing stock. You cannot build it quickly. And so what happened after the full-scale war started? We can see that those who lost their housing and had to move, their housing was their own problem, so they had to find it on their own, and there were no instruments, and there are no instruments which could regulate this situation. So the statistics is rather old, but I think it is not outdated because the situation remains the same. At the beginning, most IDPs either stayed with their rented the accommodation. Some of them stayed with their friends and families, and only some meager percentage stayed in collective centers. And as I said, the majority reside in rented accommodation, finding accommodation on the market, which is deregulated because there is no other option. And maybe it is interesting for research purposes that an important factor at play here is provided by international organizations, local NGOs, volunteers who try to bridge the gap by their own proactive initiatives. But this is not a system. This is rather a patchwork system and ad hoc solutions. So, and we would like to see if, for instance, an IDP has found some housing, and if they have found it, then maybe the market is working. And let us have a look at whether it is working in reality. So let's see. Right. What is important also is to see that in 2023, statistics are that the IDPs got the opportunity to get only 2,626 collective sites in Ukraine, and there were 116,000 IDPs in general in the middle of 2023 lived in these collective sites, while the overall number of IDPs is 5 million. And this number of IDPs who live in collective sites is dwindling away because most of them were hosted in empty schools and universities, but as soon as schools and universities reopened, they had to go look for their own housing. So these university hostels would return to their primary function, housing students and not IDPs. And the positive thing about it all is that because there is no system of housing accessibility which could be used by IDPs, then there are also some very positive examples of volunteer initiatives. Maybe this is the most famous example. Maybe you have already seen this example of self-made project, you may say, which emerged as a response to the housing crisis. And this also will affect the overall, or tries to influence the overall housing policy. This is the example of Kohate from Ivano-Frankivsk. What is interesting here? Actually, I worked with this project too, and I researched this project. And what is so attractive about this housing? It is much more stable for the people because Kohate provides a 4-year contract. On the one hand, you get solidarity, consolidation, community, and on the other hand, Kohate also provides stability. And Kohate is an NGO. What you need to know about this collective, voluntary collective housing, they are of very different quality. Not all of such hostels are created by Kohate, and quite a lot of such hostels, provide rather unhygienic conditions, and so it doesn't improve the situation of accessibility to housing in Ukraine. And again, going back, maybe I'm going back because that is my topic, and it's really interesting for me. So why it is important to have this rental market in Ukraine? In general, the importance of the rental market is growing, and yet it is growing outside any regulatory policies. And according to the CEDAS survey, we can see that in 2019, 8% of people said that they were renting, and in 2022, this number has grown twofold. This number grew twofold, so it is 16%. And I think renting is a growing practice in Ukraine, and it has a lot of consequences for urban space and for urban. It's still is tabula rasa. We have very little data about that. For instance, we don't know who the tenants are, we don't know who the landlords are, because it is again shadow market. And it is also important here to mention that there are quite a lot of challenges connected to that, because I think quite a few of you rent your housing, so you understand what I'm talking about. So the statement is that 60% of IDPs are renting, and do they have any means to continue renting until Ukraine's war is over? So whether this rent can provide for the stability of their life situation. And again, I would like to show you another map. This is quite a famous map. Quite a lot of you have seen it already.
Galyna, interrupt 1 second. You're like half an hour talking now, so about 10 minutes left.
Okay, 10 minutes. Perfect. I think it's working. Okay, so this is
it's super interesting, so carry on.
Yes, I think we are 10 minutes away from the end. So yes, so this is a very famous map. So you can see this, like how dynamic is. Sorry.
Right, this is I forgot, I need to talk in Ukrainian. So anyway, this is a very famous map, and here you can see the price dynamics, which you can also see if we're talking about the affordability of housing, or for how long IDPs can keep renting it. So for instance, you can see that this is 2023, and the median price for one bedroom apartment in Ivano-Frankivsk is, well, around 8,500 hryvnia, and the price. So and as you can see, we have statistics how much it is in terms of the overall median household income. You can see that, especially in the west of Ukraine, renting one bedroom apartment in the west of Ukraine is takes around 90% of the household income. So it is not affordable. And if you take the data from IOM, around 1/3 of all renters in Ukraine pay more than 70% of their household income on for housing, and 54% of renters spend more than half of their household income on rent and utilities. So this is for us to understand. It's a lot, and actually, even ethnographic research showed, we talked to people, and they told us that there are people who spend almost 100% of their income on housing, and they get foodstuffs donated by volunteers. So imagine this situation for you to understand that in the European Union, the highest limit for rent is 40% of household income. If you take Germany, in which 50% of population is renting, there the highest limit is 27.8% in 2023. So meaning in Ukraine, the rent is really, really high. And besides it being very high and unaffordable, we need to understand that the housing is not very accessible, not only due to rents, but also due to discrimination. And it was very interesting to see that landlords do not want to take tenants with children. So, for instance, one tenant says, I have a young child. Should I give her away to the orphanage? What to do with it? I cannot rent a flat. So it's a lot depends upon the landlord, and even people who have the resources cannot rent if they are discriminated against. And what is also important in Ukraine, if you can pay and if you have access to housing, you are not legally protected, and you can be kicked out of the rented housing at any moment. For instance, more than 37% of IDPs lack any documentation for their tenure, which can substantiate their claim that they can stay in this house. And so this requires a lot of thinking to resolve it. So, and we can use many terms like social landscape or institutional landscape, shows that the landlord always is right. And so why is it bad? Well, it is bad because we looked at the beginning of at the map that lack of housing stimulates migration. It means people are either migrating abroad or they have to return either to the occupied regions or to the regions which are under constant shelling, or they have to return to their half-ruined abodes. And IOM statistics show that more than 3 million people live in the household in houses which are damaged. Right. And so this is an issue which is often ignored, and I will take you through the policies very quickly. So what is important that in Ukraine, this issue is entering the public space very actively. For instance, in Lviv, the tenant union has emerged. Maybe if you are from Lviv, you can research more. And this tenant union tries to provide for the defend the tenants and develop some political solutions, lobby political decisions. And then, so we had a look at the situation. There is no housing. It is not accessible. It is not affordable. It is half ruined. So what started to happen after the full-scale invasion in terms of policy making? The problem with policies is that our policies are short-term, and most response to the crisis was humanitarian response. The available programs are short-term programs, like the program of hosting the IDPs, which yielded some money to the hosts, or the program for IDPs, which would provide 2,000 UAE hryvnias for IDPs, though it was not specifically a program designed for housing, rather it was used as a support to pay the rent. And as soon as this program in Ukraine came to its end, a big proportion of people, of IDPs, returned to their original places of residence. And so another program was rent subsidy since January 2025, and it never worked because it is not attractive to landlords, it's not attractive to tenants, because landlords can pay no taxes anyway, and they can do whatever they want with their housing without repairing, etc. And so the idea was to provide them with tax vacations, but because landlords never pay taxes anyway, they are not interested in this program. And for IDPs, it is not interesting either, because the program covers only 6 to 12 months, but there is a lot of paperwork to be overcome, and so you can actually find more details in the new report by CIDAS, and it was published quite recently about the housing market in Ukraine. So, and another thing, more programs, maybe you have heard, of course, about it. І оселя, і є відновлення. So these are the programs providing reduced mortgages for special categories from 7 to 3% for soldiers, teachers, veterans, researchers, etc. But the problem is that to get access to this program, you need to pay to make the first installment a payment of 20%, and the building must not be older than 10 years for special categories, or 3 years actually for other categories. And this is at once a challenge, because this kind of housing, new housing, is the most expensive kind of housing, and so you need to analyze how many people have used this program. And so, according to the data of the Ministry of Economy, since 2025, around 16,000 households have used this program, but most of them reside in Kyiv. And so this program is inaccessible to most, to IDPs. They don't have resources to use it, and it is not affordable. And if you have a look at 5 million IDPs, this program, 16,000 people, is quite little, quite low output, and so this program didn't change much. And there is yet another program, Є відновлення, and this program is about restoring the damaged housing, because it's a good idea, because it is much easier to install new windows than to find a new rented apartment for a family. But unfortunately, this is not an affordable program and not accessible. And if we go back to this regulatory theory, what else can be done? Most of our programs do not regulate anything. They try to resolve the situation through subsidies, meaning that a person gets a subsidy money without repairing or anything. And this is a super expensive solution which doesn't work without a regulatory mechanism. And so you can see it if we discuss this subsidy, rent subsidy, right? Because it came with no regulatory mechanisms regulating the activity of the landlords. So it means that there was no regulation about taxation. And so if you can lease your flat and without doing anything, why should you then, instead of this, do heaps of paperwork and get some tax vacations if you already enjoy them? So these programs are actually just transferring money from one fund to another, and so these are super expensive, but it provides no long-term solution. So the program has provided solution only for 16,000 people, but in the long run, it is not about creating some housing stock or about providing the country with some profit. When we talk about the instruments of housing policy, we can debate quite a lot. But what is important to remember here is the following. The housing policy instruments we have cannot be considered a systemic solution to the crisis. Because when we are looking at the practice of these 3.5 years, millions of IDPs didn't get any sustainable solution. And if we have a look at the migration dynamics, it is continuing. It is again, we have as many migrants as we used to have, because people are either going abroad or they are returning to damaged houses, and quite a lot of IDPs have exhausted their savings, and then they are not suggested any short-term solutions. There are some humanitarian programs for half a year, and the question is, how can you find, and then these 6 months programs are followed with mortgages, and then it is impossible to save enough money to pay the mortgages, even if they are subsidized. So though policies are being created in Ukraine, and though donors are invested in this topic, yet this is the topic which needs a lot of more effort. We are analyzing presently the situation, and the instruments we see are used today are not adequate. Their outcome is extremely low, and the challenge here is that mortgages or subsidies are not an instrument, and the prioritization should be given to vulnerable households, and they are not covered by this program. So why are we helping to people who are active, who are working, who are not jobless? But these programs actually do not cover the most vulnerable households, and this provides for the feeling of inequity in Ukraine. And so we need to see and to understand that most IDPs came from the east and they moved to the west. And so they came from the regions which are most damaged by the war, and they came to the regions which are least damaged by the war. And so this raises a lot of sensitive questions about further migration, about staying in Ukraine, about further migration, again, social equity. And this topic keeps its importance. We can, of course, dream about the end of the war and dream about the situation to resolve itself. But what can we do? Or is the situation only so horrible that we cannot do anything. So because I am a researcher and academic, first I believe we need to analyze more, and that is why you have come here. That is why you are interested in urbanism and urban planning, because you are looking for more adequate solutions and you are looking for an understanding of what is happening, in particular in housing policy, and who is paying for the housing and what kind of quality our housing is, and who are our landlords, who are our tenants. So that is why you came here. You are looking for answers, and we're looking for effective solutions. Also, I would like to say that not all programs are bad. They are bad because these are isolated, unbalanced policies which focus on using one instrument and within one sector. But if you look at these millions of damaged houses, millions of households affected by this damage to their houses, these instruments are not adequate for them. They are not prompt enough. They are not affecting the migratory processes. And so if we have come here, we must understand the role of tenancy. We need to understand the role of the rental market, and we need to diversify available instruments, and we need to also have several perspectives. We need to look at the situation now. We need to also adopt a midterm perspective. Also, what is important for Ukraine is not to build like 40% of the social housing as slums. We need to see what exactly we need, and we need to make this social housing sustainable so that it would last for a long period of time, and we need to focus on vulnerable groups, and we must see housing in terms of urbanism, and we need to see it not as an urgent problem that needs an urgent solution, but we need to take a more sustainable perspective. We need to provide sustainable houses, energy efficient houses, which will have beautiful neighborhoods, which will be situated in beautiful neighborhoods. So thank you very much, and that is all.
Thank you very much, Galyna. Very excellent, very detailed presentation, perfect for this topic. So I will open the floor up to questions. I see we have a hand by Соломія. Соломія, would you like to go ahead?
Галино, дуже дякую за вашу Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Galyna, for your presentation. Actually, it is adjacent to my research, which I conducted in Vienna last year. I researched integration of Ukrainian refugees in Vienna, and so the problem is similar. When I was talking to the director of the IDP center in Lviv or with other stakeholders on this issue, unfortunately, the situation is not resolved. Unfortunately, it is stagnating, and that's true. That when we are talking to IDPs in Lviv, they are saying that we spend all our income on rent, and this is a catastrophe. Talking to people who came here to Vienna, and they decided to stay. They stayed here actually only because they can have the housing, because in Lviv the housing is extremely expensive. They cannot earn as much as to pay. So my question, our housing code was adopted in 1983. This is a catastrophe, and it must be aligned And because our state machine is moving very slowly at the legislative level, and yet we can see some progress. At the same time, what is your understanding, what is your vision? What should the local self-governing bodies do in terms of housing? In Lviv, the solutions included modular cities, modular town, or placing people in hostels. What should the municipality do to provide IDPs with decent housing? Because we have more IDPs moving from Sumy region, for instance, and this is a problem that wants solving. So what can municipalities do, not in big cities, but in medium-sized cities? What can they do to host the IDPs? Thank you very much for your question. And I can see a similar question asked by Tatiana in the chat, who also asks, how can you see a solution to this problem of housing during the martial law? Actually, my idea is you do not need to look far. I would like to return to the slide to show you what happened, what used to happen after the wars in times of crisis. All in all, there were three basic instruments, and the first instrument was regulating the rental market and building social housing. You can say that we are in a different political situation and regulation affects the market badly, but why so? Regulation of the rent market doesn't cost anything. And if, for instance, you take building social housing, there could be some arguments that there is no budget for that, but to regulate the tenancy market, the rent market, you do not need money, you don't need any budget. So in a short-term perspective, and especially in the situation of Ukraine, I believe you need to design some legislation in the long-term perspective, and you need, of course, more research and more statistics. But in Ukraine, we already have quite a lot of premises. The basic regulation as the part of the housing code, and also there is some legislation about taxation of landlords, but nothing happens in real life about the rental market. So I believe that we can start with regulating the rent market, and we can start not simply with, I don't know, writing new laws. No, we can start taxing the landlords and getting these taxes in real life, because even when and also we need to regulate this contractually, because even when people sign agreements, they are being kicked out of the rented housing because, I don't know, the previous owner returns back from abroad. So we need to have a look at the rental market and maybe not even regulate it, but administer it, manage it, and provide stability to tenants. And then the next steps can be social housing construction. If we look at some post-war situations, on the one hand, it will be building social housing, on the other hand, making it affordable. In Ukraine, we also have the programs. People can take credit, take loans from banks, but they need to have quite a lot of money to do so. Vulnerable families, vulnerable households don't have this opportunity, so we need to regulate that, one thing. And secondly, we need to create such social housing. And there is an interesting comment in the chat also.
Вибачте, не можу.
I would like to, I try to open the chat.
Друге питання
Right.
було
The
про те,
second
що
question was
так, що дуже важливо, дуже тяжко отримати
about
правдиве відновлення,
it was about
зруйноване, та зруйноване,
e-reconstruction,
і так далі.
відновлення. It is very difficult to document the damages to one's house, and the people from the occupied territories face the biggest challenges to access these programs. And this is an issue that needs solving. I think that there are quite a lot of support in this respect, but unfortunately, not everywhere, not always. And sometimes such families are simply ignored. And in terms of equity and in terms of those most affected by the crisis, when we talk about these compensations for people who have their houses on the occupied territories, we definitely need to resolve this issue.
Можете ще, якщо у вас є
Right.
запитання,
And
або можете
if you have
просто
questions,
досвідом,
dear participants,
що мені от було дуже
please
цікаво
ask
прочитати
away. And
коментар.
for me, it was very
Якщо
interesting to read
хтось
this
захоче
comment
щось
from
сказати,
Galyna. Maybe you could share your experience. Maybe you have faced certain challenges, and please share your solutions. I think it would be very interesting for everyone.
I can ask a question while we're waiting for Galyna. So one question that I had, Galyna, is regarding squatters, or people that have moved in unofficially to homes or built self-constructed homes on land that they don't hold title to. Are there any estimates of how many people are currently doing such things, and any discussions on how to basically have squatters' rights or ability to recognize their tenure over over those properties if they are in those properties for a certain period of time?
Це теж дякую за запитання, Натан. Це теж дуже хороше питання.
Thank you very much, Nathan. It's a great question. As far as I know, this is a very relevant topic for frontline territories. It's not about squatters, it's rather about the servicemen who live in empty flats. I don't know whether this is going to be a relevant question, relevant issue in a long-term perspective, but yes, it's happening in Ukraine. And in Ukraine, actually, what we have something that we call this instrument that actually a country can mobilize or can appropriate a flat for for service people, for servicemen. I know that this happens at the front zone, but I don't think it is an issue of long-term staying there. These are the military personnel using such apartments to do their duty. And as for this unauthorized construction, we definitely know about it, but it is done mostly by oligarchs, so by people who are at power. But grassroots unauthorized construction, I don't know about that. I don't know how widely spread it is, but it played its role in Kosovo. Those who are interested in this topic, I think, should see this video about Kosovo, where the residents were building their own houses without waiting when the municipal regulatory norms would be adopted. Right. I can see Yelena Rachevska has a question. Hello, good evening. A very interesting lecture. I don't have a question exactly. I would like to share my experience about all sorts of activities for IDPs. I'm from Kamensk in Dnipropetrovsk region, and it is under a lot of shelling lately. So how we resolve IDP challenges? We have two modular towns. I don't know the exact number of people, but there are quite a lot of them residing there. And also, quite recently, there was a tender for abandoned houses, which stayed empty for a long time. Like in this case, it was a kindergarten, half damaged, and the tender was to reconstruct it as housing for IDPs. But the social reaction is the following. Well, again, you this budget for the army. Why do we need, reconstructing this for IDPs? So the social reaction is not positive at all. But I believe it is compulsory to provide such housing, to rebuild such structures, because on the one hand you reconstruct, on the other hand you provide housing for vulnerable groups. In my neighborhood there was also a dilapidating hostel, but after the tender procedure it was reconstructed, and it was reconstructed for former combatants and their families, microflats. And now this hostel is no longer a hostel, but rather an apartment building housing families of former combatants. So yes, we have positive examples as well, and we have positive cases. Our community tries to find budget to reconstruct such damaged or dilapidating houses, to provide housing to those the families of those who died in action, and so to give these flats to the families. And so there are advantages and at the same time disadvantages, because again there is some social reaction that, okay, so again those authorities are building something. We are trying to stay in touch with the families of those who were killed in action, so that such families could get housing, and also to provide housing to people who came to our city as IDPs or who lost their housing in our city as a result of the Russian attacks. So we are doing a lot of work, and in general there is a lot of work done. Unfortunately, it is not as effective, as active as needed. It is rather slow. We would like to speed it up, but we are moving in this direction towards improvement. Right, thank you very much for your comment. True. Many initiatives are now taking place. There are many new proactive programs, and this question is being politicized. It is also published a lot and discussed a lot. But this, I agree, solutions are not enough, because, only specific people, specific clients get some help, donor help, etc. But this doesn't apply to people who stay in the frontline zones. So this is not a systemic solution. This is always ad hoc. And it is quite an interesting example that you have mentioned about this reconstruction of dilapidated houses. Unfortunately, this is not within my competence, but it is important also to think that such housing must be energy efficient, must be sustainable from the point of view of climate change, from the point of view of environment. I think this is a good example of reuse of the existing infrastructure, its extension, and these issues also are parts of the big housing problem. So we need to take them into account when, yeah, I can see Volodymyr has a question.
Доброго вечора.
Right. Good evening to everyone. I would like to share my experience in the Carpathian region. There are quite a lot of houses, abandoned houses in villages, because people left them, or maybe people died and there are no families who can take these houses and maintain them. And so quite a lot of communities there last year tried to use these houses so that they could place residents in them. Sometimes, as Nathan managed, there was some squatting practice, like people would ask the neighbors and maybe found the migrants somewhere and contacted them for a permission to move in. And quite a lot of houses were now are inhabited by people, but they have no documentation, they have no agreements, because there are no property owners to sign the agreements with. And so presently no one kicks them out. They are investing money into repair, they are improving the infrastructure. Some of these residents already start their businesses. Quite often they open shops, and these shops sometimes are the first shops in the village. And still, the public sector cannot provide them with the documents. And I know quite a lot of cases when IDPs create their own councils in such villages. I know that they have approached the authorities with the recommendations, and there was even a meeting at the Cabinet of Ministers about this. But for several years, there is no solution about squatting, about unauthorized residents. And at the same time, I think it is a good solution for providing cheap housing for IDPs, inexpensive housing. Yes, thank you very much for your comment. And I believe this is important. Why they are not providing documentation? Maybe it is because they believe the property owners are migrants who might return, and so they are stalling this question. But this is not an issue that is impossible to resolve. Like in many European countries, there is this issue of vacant housing, and then the owner can be fined if the housing stays vacant for a long time, or squatters get the official right to move in. Like in Germany, I know that when you are building something, you need to specify the purpose of your construction. And if you indicate that this is housing, and you build this housing and keep it vacant, then you will be fined for this, for failure to fulfill the contractual obligations, because you have agreed to build housing and it must be used as such. So there are quite a lot of instruments. This is what I mean. And they are rather flexible. So, for instance, in cities which have a lot of challenges, if, for instance, such housing stays vacant for 3 months, then it could incur some consequences. This period can be prolonged to 3 years, and this could be spelled out legally. So what is important here, you are mentioning villages, rural areas, because in Kiev, I think we have, it is rather visible. You can see it, that the house stays empty. But in villages, the issue of residence, of housing, is actually not given much attention to. So thank you very much for your comment. And Olesa, I don't know how much time we have, so let us give the floor to Olesa. Right? Okay, I think around 2 questions we can take. So, Ms. Olesa, you have the floor. Olesa Homin. Thank you very much. So maybe you have technologies which allow you to, for instance, military waste. So that, for instance, military waste could be recycled to build houses. I'm just asking, it's a question for our work. I think it is rather interesting to know because we will need to rebuild Ukraine. And so if we understand that new houses must be inclusive, must be energy efficient, must be inexpensive, affordable. But at the same time, we will get a lot of waste. Maybe there are some methods, maybe there are some technical solutions that such waste can be recycled as building material. Thank you very much for your question. Yes, this is one more aspect about materials. It's materials science. It's not my province, but I know I have colleagues in this TU Berlin and in Weimar. I have colleagues who are developing new materials, how they are dealing with concrete recycling, and I don't know what to do with military waste specifically. Maybe they are contaminated, but I'm sure we can work with that. And there are quite a lot of technologies which are not mainstream in construction, but they are there. And maybe the post-war reconstruction is an opportunity to do something that hasn't been before. So I would like to wish you every good luck with researching this issue. Thank you.
Давайте останнє питання
And
від Дениса.
And I think the last question from Denis Plitnov. Actually, I would like not to ask a question, rather to answer the previous question. Actually, in Ukraine, every university which has a laboratory for building materials are doing exactly that. They're doing this research. But it depends upon the kind of object which was damaged, upon the kind of waste which was collected. Because we can take not just a big heap of, debris, we can sort it. For instance, reinforced concrete separately, brick separately, etc. If all the building materials are heaped together, then this is more difficult, and it depends how much of the recycled materials can be added to new materials. So if we understand that they are homogeneous, then we can use them more. If they are heterogeneous, then we can add not more than 2-3% of the recycled materials to new materials. Thank you very much. I can see more questions that this will be comments that this issue will be discussed further in the course. So, right. Thank you very much. And I would like to wish you again every success in working with these very relevant topics. Thank you very much for sharing your ideas, your experience, and I can feel that I have learned some new things today. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. And good luck with your defense of your PhD. Thank you. So, am I free to leave then? Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here, and hope to
Appreciate
see you next time soon. So very insightful, and thanks a lot.
Yeah, my
Goodbye.
pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
All right, Louette, how long of a break would you suggest?
Thanks also, Elena, who's going to leave us now as well. Thanks again for your wonderful work, and see you next week. And let's take a break for 15 minutes or 13 it will be, so 1:15. Does work for everyone, and then just go to the room as normally. They are already there, I see. See you in a bit.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye.